Imagine finding out that the official government dietary guidelines uh, just told you to eat more butter and red meat.
Yeah, that is a massive disruption.
Right. Like literally decades of foundational health advice completely flipped on its head. Today, we're staring at the highly debated January 2026 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And, I mean, the scientific community is essentially in a civil war over it.
It really is a massive disruption to the entire nutritional landscape. For you, the listener, trying to figure out what actually constitutes a healthy diet, well, it's probably never felt more complicated.
Absolutely.
Because the sheer volume of conflicting advice coming from top authorities right now is just unprecedented.
Exactly. Which is why, for this deep dive, we are cutting through all that noise. We've pulled together an incredible stack of sources. We're looking at those controversial new 2026 guidelines alongside decades of massive observational studies and, localized clinical trial data.
So a really robust data set.
Right. The mission today is to extract the verified scientific nuggets from all this research, explain the underlying biology of how food actually operates in your body, and give you a clear, balanced shortcut to understanding your fuel. No fads, no marketing, just the science. So, okay, let's unpack this,
Let's do it.
starting with the stark reality of why getting this right is so urgent.
Yeah, we have to ground this conversation in the stakes, which, go far beyond aesthetic weight loss.
Right, it's not just about looking good in a swimsuit.
Exactly. Poor diet is actively one of the leading causes of mortality in the U.S. It's sitting right alongside tobacco use as a primary driver of disease.
Wow, tobacco.
Yeah, it's that serious. And the financial ripple effect detailed in the data is just staggering.
I can imagine.
Poor diet's driving cardiometabolic diseases, so conditions like heart disease and type 2 diabetes, those cost the U.S. approximately $50 billion annually.
50 billion.
And obesity-related medical costs, those are hitting $150 billion per year.
That is just a massive drain on the healthcare system. And, it brings up the foundational concept in the data, which is energy balance.
Right.
We hear the phrase calories in, calories out all the time, but the sources frame it more like a highly adaptive thermodynamic engine.
That's a good way to look at it.
Like if you consistently overload the engine with more fuel than it can burn over nutrition,
Yeah.
basically the system ultimately breaks down.
And that breakdown leads to hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. The maintenance of energy balance over time really is the non-negotiable rule of thermodynamics.
Right.
Your total daily energy expenditure is a calculation of your resting metabolic rate, the thermic effect of the food you digest, and your physical activity.
So how much you move.
Exactly. If your intake exceeds that expenditure regularly, the biological consequences poor health outcomes, regardless of the specific dietary dogma you happen to be following.
Let me push back on that, though, because I feel like this is where the public gets incredibly frustrated.
Oh, for sure.
If energy balance is just a strict physics equation of calories in versus calories out, does the actual quality of the food even matter for weight loss and health? Or is, like, a calorie just a calorie?
Well, it is the most common point of confusion, and it is where we absolutely must separate short-term weight management from long-term cellular health and longevity.
Okay, so they're not the same thing.
Not at all. The research clearly delineates this when we look at the heavily debated low-fat versus low-carb diets.
Which everyone argues about.
Right. An observational study tracking populations over years showed that an unhealthy low-fat or unhealthy low-carb diet actually increases your mortality risk.
Wait, really? So even if you are perfectly maintaining your energy balance, like eating a low-calorie diet, if the food relies on highly refined grains or poor quality processed proteins, your mortality risk still goes up.
Precisely. The biological mechanism there is chronic inflammation and cellular degradation over time. However, the exact same study showed that a healthy version of either a low-fat or low-carb diet, one focusing on whole foods, intact plant proteins, and unsaturated fats, decreases mortality.
So the macro split doesn't matter as much as the source.
Exactly. Energy balance might dictate the mass of your body, but the structural quality of your food dictates your cellular longevity.
So quality is basically the blueprint for how you age. If quality is that critical, let's look at the gold standard dietary patterns in the sources.
Let's do it.
When we look at the data, the Mediterranean diet and plant-based dietary patterns consistently dominate the top tier of evidence for reducing disease. Let's start with the heavyweight champion, the Mediterranean diet.
A classic for a reason.
Right. The sources highlight the focus on olive oil, nuts, whole grains, beans, and keeping red meat very low. And the CardioPrev trial really stood out to me here.
Yeah, the CardioPrev trial out of Spain is a landmark piece of clinical evidence.
Oh, absolutely.
The researchers took over 1,000 adults who already had established coronary heart disease, meaning a very high-risk population, and tracked them over 7 years.
That's a really long time for a trial like that.
It is. Half were prescribed a Mediterranean diet, and half were put on a standard low-fat diet.
And the results were just profound. The group on the Mediterranean diet had significantly fewer major cardiovascular events.
Much fewer.
Like, the data showed fewer heart attacks, fewer strokes, and less need for revascularization procedures. And just to clarify for the listener, revascularization is basically when doctors have to go in and surgically unblock or bypass your arteries, like with a stent, right?
That is correct, yes. It's restoring blood flow to the heart.
Got it.
Avoiding those procedures, alongside lower overall cardiovascular death rates compared to the low-fat group, demonstrates immense protective power.
Which is incredible.
We see this echoed in the Predemin trial as well, which demonstrated a remarkable 40% reduction in stroke risk alone on the Mediterranean diet.
A 40% drop in stroke risk
Yeah.
just from changing the fuel you consume.
Yeah.
That's wild. I kind of look at the Mediterranean diet like a symphony.
Symphony, I like that.
Yeah, like people always want to know if it's the olive oil playing the solo that's doing all the heavy lifting, or the nuts, or the fish. But the data strongly suggests it's the whole orchestra working together.
Right, the synergy.
Exactly. The synergistic aggregation of the fiber, the monounsaturated fats, and the polyphenols is what actually provides the benefit.
Trying to isolate one magic nutrient almost always fails in clinical trials. It really is the comprehensive pattern that matters.
Which brings us to the other heavyweight pattern, which is plant-based diets.
Yes.
The sources show a massive spectrum here. You've got pescatarians who still eat fish, to lacto-vegetarians, all the way to strict vegans.
It's a broad label.
It really is. The overarching data shows these patterns lower the risk of obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. But there is a massive blind spot here that the sources point out.
There is.
Because a plant-based label is not just an automatic free pass to biological health, is it?
No, a label does not guarantee nutritional adequacy. You can eat a diet completely devoid of animal products that consists entirely of hyper-processed, refined, sugary cereals, fried foods, and soda.
The junk food vegan.
Exactly. It is technically plant-based, but from a biological standpoint, it is a metabolic disaster that will drive insulin resistance.
But even beyond the junk food vegan trap, the data highlights physiological blind spots, even for people who are, really trying to eat healthy plant-based diets.
Right. The studies indicate that strict exclusion of animal products can lead to significantly lower bone mineral density.
Which sounds concerning.
The mechanism there is an issue of bioavailability. Plants contain calcium, but they also contain compounds like oxalates and phytates.
And what do those do?
They bind to minerals and prevent your gut from absorbing them efficiently. Over time, the body actually leaches calcium from the bones to maintain blood calcium levels, increasing your fracture risk.
Wow. The sources also flag a high risk for inadequate vitamin B12 for anyone excluding animal products.
Yes, that's a major one.
Because a B12 deficiency can lead to severe neurological and hematological issues.
Right.
Meaning the actual production of red blood cells gets compromised, right?
Yes. Without B12, red blood cells become abnormally large and they just cannot function properly.
Which is macrocytic anemia.
Correct. So critical thinking is really required here. Adopting a plant-based pattern means you have to be highly strategic to ensure the biological and biochemical needs of the human body are actually being met.
Okay, so the Mediterranean and healthy plant-based diets are the historically reigning champions of longevity. And a core foundational tenet of both of those patterns has always been limiting saturated fats and heavily restricting red meat.
That's been the consensus for a long time.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, here we go.
The landscape has just been hit with a massive earthquake.
A disruption that has basically sent shockwaves through the entire nutritional science community.
Yeah. Because the brand new 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines for Americans literally just dropped in January 2026.
And they are wild.
For our entire lives, the government has told us to cut back on saturated fat. But these new guidelines actively promote sources of saturated fat. They specifically point to red meat, full-fat dairy, and butter.
It's a huge pivot.
And they push a startlingly high protein goal. Like, the recommendation has shifted to 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight.
Which is a lot.
Yeah, for a standard 70-kilogram adult, that is up to 112 grams of protein a day. That's nearly triple the old baseline.
The aggressive shift toward animal proteins and saturated fats completely contradicts the established messaging of the last half century.
Wait, I have to step in as the voice of the listener here because
Yeah.
this is just glaring.
I know it's confusing.
How does this new 2026 advice square with the American Heart Association? They are actively telling us to limit saturated fats to under 10% of our calories. Or the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which still classifies processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen and red meat as a probable carcinogen. Like, how are official dietary guidelines promoting a steak cooked in butter while cancer and heart organizations are ringing biological alarm bells?
This raises an important question. How can top health authorities look at the exact same body of scientific evidence and arrive at entirely contradictory, diametrically opposed conclusions?
It's baffling.
It is. And it is critical for you, the listener, to understand that we are not endorsing either side of this debate.
No, not at all.
We are impartially analyzing the data so you can understand the mechanics of why this scientific tug-of-war exists in the first place.
Right. We are simply looking at why the researchers are essentially throwing data at each other.
Exactly. The conflict ultimately stems from how different scientists weigh different types of study designs.
Okay, break that down for us.
So the factions supporting the new 2026 guidelines lean heavily on massive observational data, most notably the 2021 Pew RE study.
Which is huge, right?
Enormous. It was an international cohort tracking over 134,000 participants across multiple continents for nearly a decade.
And the findings in the Pew RE study drew a very hard line between processed and unprocessed meat.
They did. The data showed that high consumption of processed meat, so foods altered through salting, curing, or smoking, like hot dogs and bacon, increased mortality risk by over 50%.
Okay, that makes sense.
But crucially, the study found no increased risk of major cardiovascular disease or mortality associated with eating unprocessed red meat.
So in a study of 134,000 people, an unprocessed steak did not show the same danger as a highly processed sausage.
Correct.
That seems really compelling. Why wouldn't everyone just agree with that?
Well, because of the inherent flaws in observational studies. In global studies like PURE, researchers are looking at populations in developing nations where diets are often calorie deficient.
Oh, I see.
In those contexts, adding nutrient-dense red meat prevents malnutrition. So of course it looks beneficial or neutral. But traditional health authorities argue you cannot apply that logic to a Western population that is already overfed and sedentary.
They're essentially saying context is everything.
Exactly. The traditionalists, like the American Heart Association, base their warnings on the actual biochemistry seen in randomized controlled trials.
Which look at the mechanisms.
Mechanistically, saturated fats decrease the liver's ability to clear LDL cholesterol from the bloodstream. They downregulate the LDL receptors on your liver cells.
Which raises your serum lipids. And just to ensure we're all on the same page, serum lipids is the medical term for the concentration of cholesterol and fats floating around in your bloodstream.
Yes. When those receptors are downregulated, the cholesterol gets trapped in the blood, eventually penetrating the arterial walls and driving atherosclerosis.
Yikes.
Meta-analyses of controlled trials show that if you replace dietary saturated fat like butter with polyunsaturated fat like olive oil, you reduce the risk of coronary heart disease by 29%.
A 29% reduction simply by changing the biochemical shape of the fat molecule. This is essentially a masterclass in why nutrition is so confusing.
It really is.
You have observational studies showing meat might be fine in certain global contexts, clashing violently with controlled trials showing the exact mechanism of how saturated fat blocks cholesterol clearance.
Which is why the overarching labels of pro-meat or anti-meat are currently deadlocked in this 2026 debate. Human diets are incredibly complex to study in a vacuum over decades.
Since the authorities are fighting over the macro labels, let's zoom in on the biological mechanisms that nobody is fighting over.
I like that approach.
Because despite the massive controversy over the 2026 guidelines, there are undeniable dietary building blocks that have unanimous scientific consensus. Let's look at the absolute yes list and the absolute no list.
This is the verified data that remains entirely stable regardless of the shifting guidelines.
Right. Starting with the ultimate yes, which is fiber.
Absolutely essential.
I like to think of fiber not just as roughage, but as a biochemical sponge.
Yeah.
Or, like putting speed bumps on your digestive highway. The goal for most adults is 25 to 34 grams a day.
The mechanism of action for fiber is just brilliant. It is the carbohydrate portion of plants that human enzymes cannot break down.
So it just passes through.
Well, insoluble fiber adds bulk to your digestive tract, but soluble fiber is where the magic really happens. It dissolves in water to form a viscous gel in your small intestine.
Ah, those are the speed bumps.
Precisely. That gel traps carbohydrates and physically prevents your digestive enzymes from rapidly breaking them down into glucose.
Which slows everything down.
It blunts the glucose spike in your blood, meaning your pancreas doesn't have to emergency dump insulin. Over time, this controlled insulin response drastically improves your metabolic profile.
And the real-world impact is undeniable. The sources include a prospective cohort study looking at 4,000 patients who had already suffered a heart attack. The data showed that the patients who adopted a high-fiber diet drastically lowered their risk of a second cardiovascular event.
Yeah.
And they significantly lowered their overall mortality.
It is a powerful protective intervention.
And looking at the sources, fiber isn't the only thing acting as a biological shield. The data on nuts and oily fish shows a strikingly similar protective effect.
It does.
The combined data from 3 large cohorts showed that consuming nuts 5 or more times a week lowers the risk of heart attack and stroke. And consuming oily fish, like salmon, just 1 to 2 times a week is associated with a lower risk of acute coronary syndrome.
To clarify, acute coronary syndrome refers to conditions where the blood supply to the heart muscle is suddenly and severely reduced. It's essentially the medical precursor to, or the occurrence of, a heart attack.
Oh, okay.
The omega-3 fatty acids in the fish and the monounsaturated fats in the nuts actively reduce the inflammation that causes those sudden blockages.
Okay, so fiber at 25 to 34 grams a day, nuts 5 times a week, and oily fish a couple of times a week. That is the biological yes list. Now for the absolute no list.
The things to avoid.
Right. If fiber and omega-3s are the raw materials our cells recognize and utilize, the items on this list are essentially alien code. At the top, ultra-processed foods.
Highly processed foods, packaged sweet and savory snacks, reconstituted meats, industrially manufactured breads, they are engineered to be extremely calorie-dense while being entirely stripped of fiber and micronutrients.
The worst of both worlds.
An exhaustive, systematic review associated exposure to ultra-processed foods with 32 distinct adverse health parameters.
32 different ways the body negatively reacts to engineered food. That's insane.
Yes. Increased risks of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, higher rates of anxiety, combined common mental health disorders, and overall mortality. It is a profound systemic disruption.
Speaking of engineered code, what about the things we engineer specifically to try and cheat the biological system?
I'm looking at the data.
And artificial sweeteners. People swap regular soda for diet soda, assuming it's a free biological pass.
The scientific consensus there has shifted heavily. The World Health Organization now explicitly recommends against the use of non-sugar sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, and stevia for weight loss or chronic disease reduction.
The WHO literally saying do not use these is a massive red flag.
It really is.
But why? If they have 0 calories, how are they linked to higher risks of obesity and cardiovascular issues over the long term?
It comes down to the brain and the microbiome. When the sweet taste receptors on your tongue detect an artificial sweetener, they signal the brain, triggering what's called a cephalic phase response.
Okay, so your brain gets tricked.
Your brain assumes sugar is arriving and signals the pancreas to release insulin. When the sugar never actually arrives, your blood glucose drops, which triggers massive hunger and cravings.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, these synthetic compounds alter the gut microbiota, which actually impairs your body's ability to regulate glucose natively.
So you try to cheat the system, and the system retaliates. And the WHO's harsh stance connects directly to another deeply normalized habit on the no list. For years, we've heard the narrative that a glass of red wine is good for your heart.
Right.
But looking at these sources, that narrative is completely dead.
It is entirely obsolete. We have to look at the Global Burden of Disease study, which is one of the most comprehensive epidemiological analyses on the planet.
And what do they find?
Their finding on alcohol is unequivocal. Cancer risk increases monotonically with alcohol intake.
Monotonically, meaning every single incremental increase in alcohol equals a mathematical increase in cancer risk.
Exactly. Even light consumption, defined as just 3 to 6 drinks a week, is directly associated with an increased risk of breast cancer, as well as oropharyngeal and esophageal cancer.
Just from light drinking.
Yes, the ethanol is metabolized into acetaldehyde, which is a toxic chemical that damages DNA and prevents cells from repairing the damage.
That's terrifying.
While there may be incredibly minor cardiovascular benefits for very specific older demographics, the severe increase in cancer risk completely wipes out those microbenefits. Zero alcohol is unequivocally the healthiest choice.
No amount is safe.
What's fascinating here is how modern society has entirely normalized the Western diet, which basically operates in direct biological opposition to the consensus data.
We basically live on the no list.
The standard way of eating heavily relies on the no list, ultra-processed engineered foods, artificial sweeteners, and alcohol, and is profoundly deficient in the yes list, practically eliminating fiber and whole plants. We have normalized a metabolic state that is actively driving the leading causes of death.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started with the sheer financial and physical devastation of poor diets. We established that energy balance is your thermodynamic foundation. But we also learned that structural quality dictates your longevity. Like, an unhealthy low-calorie diet will still degrade your cells.
And we navigated the incredibly complex evolution of nutritional science, looking at why top authorities are fundamentally disagreeing in 2026.
Right. We understand why observational studies clash with controlled clinical trials. And while the institutions might be in a tug of war over whether butter and steak are killing you or saving you, there is undeniable biological truth in the middle.
The mechanisms don't lie.
They don't. Nobody is arguing against the viscous gel of soluble fiber. Nobody's arguing against plants, nuts, and omega-3s. And absolutely nobody is defending ultra-processed alien food, artificial sweeteners, or alcohol.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, the most critical takeaway for you, the listener, is the absolute necessity of personalization.
Right, there's no magic bullet.
There is no one-size-fits-all dietary template. The healthiest dietary pattern is the one that aligns with your genetic predispositions, your cultural background, and your financial budget. It must be sustainable for your specific life, otherwise the biological benefits will never materialize.
Sustainable for you. Which actually brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with.
Okay.
We've spent this entire deep dive looking internally. We've looked at what different food patterns do to your cells, your liver receptors, your heart. But there's an entirely different layer to this puzzle rapidly emerging in the science.
Oh, you mean the impact on planetary health?
Exactly.
Yeah.
As the data on our environment continues to advance, we are learning that how we grow, harvest, and source our food has massive implications for the planet. So the next time you are standing in front of the fridge or making your grocery list, you won't just be weighing your own personal biological needs. You'll be forced to ask yourself a much larger question.
That's a huge shift.
How do I balance the health of my own cellular machinery against the health of the planet that sustains it?
It is a profound, incredibly complex question, and one that is going to dictate the future of nutritional science in the decades to come.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the noise and into the science. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking at the underlying mechanisms, and most importantly, keep learning. Catch you next time.